Hey, Jeff, you can't see me. This is a good thing for YouTube.
Oh, yeah, move that mic out of the way. Good afternoon, Richland College. You're listening to KDUX Web Radio, broadcast live from Richland College. I don't like how that came out. Take 4. You're listening to KDUX Web Radio, broadcast live from Richland College in Dallas, Texas. We are the voice of Richland College. Views expressed in this show are our own, unless otherwise stated, and do not reflect the opinion of KDUX Web Radio. Web Radio. You know, it's so funny. I was listening to my students' podcast the other day. In similar situation, the Web Radio Richland. It's a tough 3 syllables to hit. Anyhow, Web Radio Richland College, or the DCCCD, otherwise known as Dakota. Well, ladies and gentlemen, glad to be here. Very special occasion. We have some guests in the studio. Alicia Keys and Lenny Kravitz's daughter. Oh no, wait, wrong booking. That was yesterday.
That was yesterday. Yeah.
No, we have a couple of guests that I'd rather hang out with, frankly. And those would be the Shapeshifters themselves, Stewart Barr and Tony Pitucco. Welcome, fellas. Welcome.
Thank you, Jeff.
Glad to be here. This sounds like a lot of fun.
Happy to have you.
It's going to be a great show.
That's
if Stu Barr wasn't here, we'd be even better.
I've gone into it thinking that every show, and I think this is show number 60, something like that. Maybe this time I'll actually do it. Maybe we'll actually have a good show this time.
Oh, I think you always have.
Thanks. What do you think, student? Do we have good shows?
Yeah.
Well, that sounded convincing.
I think you took them by surprise.
Yeah.
You did too.
I paid him $5. They didn't say a word.
Yeah, seriously. It's inflation, you know.
Oh, man,
Right,
got
guys.
jokes.
So yeah, it's so fantastic to have you here. Listeners of the radio show know I've been plugging you guys since the first episode. This is season 5 of the Philosophy Club Radio Hour, and I should sort of contextualize this a bit. The Philosophy Club Radio Hour is an extension of the Philosophy Club. The Philosophy Club proper meets every Tuesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. in room EO32. It's El Paso Hall 32. And then on Wednesdays, every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m., you have the Philosophy Club Radio Hour, where students and whatever members of the Philosophy Club were in attendance at the meeting the day before, a selection of them drop by the studio and we continue the conversation. We recap a little bit and then we continue it. But we have some special guests in the studio today, and so we're going to switch things up a little bit. I want to more focus on the essence of y'all's presentation as well. And again, the topic was fact value dichotomy in the Philosophy Club, and we could certainly talk about that, but I'm really interested in hearing more about the overlap, so to speak. The shape, yeah, taking shape.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this as well. Last week's episode was canceled, unfortunately. Our producer extraordinaire, our engineer of excellence, current member of the year, staff member of the year, Jack Fletcher, has been laid up. He was laid up all last week with sickness. I'm not sure what he had. Mono, maybe? The plague, the Black Plague, and so
You must have known we were coming.
yeah, right. Yeah, maybe the plague's in the studio right now, as it often is, and so yeah, we had to unfortunately not have a meeting, or rather we had a meeting, but not a show last time. So there is a lot to cover. There's a lot of ground we could talk about, but yeah, I apologize to the listeners there. Blame Jack's lack of care for himself, I guess. Is that fair?
Yeah, no joke there.
No joke there. That's what happens when you're perpetually underslept, and I think everybody else knows this too. So anyways, we're back. We like to start off with introductions. So I guess we can start in the far corner with you, Stu.
Yeah, I'm Stewart Barr. We're from Tucson, Arizona. I was the chair of Philosophy, Religion, Humanities, and Speech for 12 years.
Welcome.
Love philosophy. That's why I got into it in there. And as a department chair, I had a great run as a teacher. We're retired. I retired from the position in 2013 in there.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jeff. My name is Tony Pitucco. I was also at Pima Community College. I was the chair of the physics, astronomy, geology, and geography department, and shared the same feelings that Stu did. In fact, Stu was my student when I was much younger and better looking and taller. He ruined me.
Puts the
And,
Stu in student.
Yeah, exactly right. And Stewart came back to teach philosophy, and actually, from my physics classes, was cajoled me by deceivery and all forms of leisure demand. He got me to teach philosophy, which I really enjoyed for how many 26 years, I think, something like that. And so I always taught philosophy and humanities, and together with my math and physics teaching, it was just a wonderful experience over the past 42 years. And then we retired almost the same day. I think we did retire the same day.
Exactly the same day.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, we did exactly the same day. And since that time, I'm trying to avoid him, but he keeps finding me. So here I am.
Well, yesterday
Like
we
a
were
plague.
in one of Jeff's class on ethics. Well, as a philosopher, my ethics were to deceive Tony into getting him to teach. It's one thing to teach ethics; it's quite another to practice it. And I always made sure my students knew the difference.
Stewart basically falsified my name onto a course that he invented, a time, and it wasn't invent the course, but he invented the time and the location. Didn't tell me about it till 2 minutes before the class when I had a break, and he had found out when my free time was. Popped the course in there, popped my name into it. In those days, it was a paper schedule, so we couldn't do anything on the computer to see anything in advance. And there I was. He comes to my office and says, "You're teaching a class," threw the book at me, and he shifted me off to teach this philosophy 101, which I loved at that point, and it was great. And I got into class and made up stuff as I went along, and I've been making up stuff since then in philosophy.
Stu, so was that an act of friendship or an act of betrayal?
No, it was an act of revenge.
The best kind of act.
He paid me back royally, I'll tell you. But it was the best payback I've ever had. To teach philosophy and humanities was actual a gift. And then we went directly into honors and taught honors for years, and got Stewart. I was director of honors for several years, right? And
3 years.
3 years, and then got Stewart to teach honors. We developed an entire honors program. We had over how many? At least 1,200 students to start.
At one time, they got them up to
1,200.
about 1,200.
And then we took honor students on European trips. We got them involved as much interactive learning as you possibly could, and it was really quite an experience, quite a run.
One of the things the two of us collaborated on is something that we put together is we watched over periods of time as you used to have something to take the arts and sciences, and it was a conjunction. What we began to see is arts or sciences, which is an error. And since he came from a science, I come from a humanities, and we always saw how well these work together.
Yeah.
We both found this problematic.
And there was a common element, a common core, which Stu and I would talk about over many years, the creativity and the creative aspects of how science today. It's a wonderful endeavor, but it does seem to lack, and it seems to be lacking more and more as years go by, a fundamental creativity that we believed was because since the schools had cut out a lot of humanities as requirements, and we did a lot of research on this to find out why this was the case, and we start seeing a dollar figure based upon several reports and so on over the past few years, that for every dollar spent in the sciences, particularly STEM, and I'm not against STEM at all, I'm a STEM person, but only 7 cents was spent on humanities, and that ratio was appalling. We started to realize right away that the creative aspects, which became kind of one of the apexes of a triad, humanities, sciences, and the apex being creativity, was the real core that we wanted to exploit and to really bring back into the classroom.
And we see some of it now. I just finished reading. Some of the physicists like Stephen Hawkins made the comment that philosophy is unnecessary and it's a waste of time in any of this. And you shouldn't use it.
Sound like my students.
Yeah. The problem he forgot was to say that is in fact a philosophical position.
Exactly.
So you're not escaping that when we did it. And we watched I think it's very important for people to have a holistic education. We like to categorize things into different disciplines. It makes it easy. I've also said that a lot of this creativity is hard to measure. One of the problems is it's easy to measure how well someone does on a test. But I saw education become, I call it assembly line education. You get a piece of steel on one end, you get a car on the other. People aren't cars. And so when you had people, you measured your success by how well they did some assessment or whatever at the end of the line, you don't really have the foggiest idea what they're doing. Tony and I, we had the things at Pima where we taught called program review, and every 5 years you had to go over it.
Yeah.
But they never understood that your real review is how well your students do at the next level, not how well they do here. If they do excellent in my class and they fail on a transfer program, which is we thought, it doesn't matter. I did them a disservice as a student. I did not prepare them for the next level. And that, to me, as an instructor, was my job. I needed them to be prepared, and I needed them enthusiastic.
I think that's so noble, and I don't think you'd feel that way if you knew my students. No, I'm joking.
We met them yesterday.
We met them. Yeah.
You do know my students.
Yeah, they. I think they tried to stop us from getting into the studio. They're still on the way in. So.
Jeff, I'm not going to say anything. You got your students here, you know.
Yeah, we're
I
a little
do,
worried.
don't I?
Yeah, they're kind of staring us down right
I
here.
hardly notice
It's a
when
little
they're
bit
here.
intimidating, so we have to be really good. That's what we found out.
We'll
right?
talk privately later.
Yeah.
At least we learned yesterday from class. You asked us to kill our professor, so that was something really good.
Oh, yeah, let's get it. Let's get it. Well, okay, one thing at a time.
Okay.
I know my students are eager to talk about killing the professors, but we'll get to that. When time comes. Let's introduce some of the students who are here in the studio. Who do we got here?
My name is Alicia Keys.
Welcome.
I'm just visiting the campus.
what's going on?
You know,
Hey, great job
just
yesterday.
trying to show support around here.
Welcome, Alicia.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the studio.
Thank you, no problem. I met Alicia Keys yesterday.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's
It was
great.
a nice
Wonderful.
experience.
Good to have you here. Good to have you here. Great. You may want to get out right away. Be careful. It's Stewart Barr nearby.
My name is Pingo Rafael, and I'm a neuroscience major. I use Richland College.
Yeah, and he was in the honors ethics class that you guys co-taught yesterday.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And who do we got over here to my right?
I'm Neil. Nice to meet you guys.
Good to meet
Good
you.
to meet you.
He comes to the philosophy club a lot. Who do we?
Hi, I'm the backer.
Were you there yesterday? I think I.
I missed yesterday.
You missed
I had
yesterday.
work, so
Oh,
I
okay.
wasn't able to participate.
But he's here now. Who do we got back there now? Who's like peeking around you?
Sorry. My name is Haya. I'm sorry I didn't come yesterday, even though I really wanted to, but I was a part of the event that was going on upstairs as a student leader. So
That was very important, Haya. Very, very good. Glad you did that. Great.
thank you.
Did a good job.
She's not picking up on the sarcasm. That's okay. She'll get us on that. Haya is Student Government Association Student Body President.
Excellent.
So she was in charge of that.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Also an officer in the philosophy club. So all the best people
Congratulations.
go. She's like, no, don't.
Stewart Barr tried to be an officer. They kicked him out several times. Uh-oh.
Can't win them all.
And of course, my name is Jeff Manzi, philosophy professor / philosophy club faculty advisor / honor student organization co-advisor. Happy to be here, guys. So, so as the students were filing in, hang on, the computer's doing stuff. Jack. As the students were filing in, the shapeshifters here, Stewart and Tony, were talking about
Shape.
Yeah, I suppose the impetus behind the whole endeavor here. I did want to ask you guys something real quick.
Yeah.
Shapeshifters. So the SHAPE stands for Science, Humanities, Art, Philosophy, Education. Were you intending to put science first?
Well, actually, we were looking for a word that might actually capture the attention. So when we put science first, it was only because there were several other words we could use with S as the beginning. Of course, they had to be clean. So we we came up. We were sitting, I think, having coffee one morning. Is that right,
Yeah, we
Stewart?
were.
And we just drew them out, and it just turned out that other than the A, S seemed to hit the pattern, and then suddenly shape came into place. Once you hear shape, you automatically think shape shifting, and so
Yeah.
shifting became shifting. Shaping education, shifting perspectives became kind of the subtitle, and that's where we got our name, and that's how we got our start. Basically, to try to get not not to create, right? To more or less recreate where we had been from several years ago, and from the 50s right through the 70s. We did remarkable things. Sciences and humanities did remarkable things in literature, in film, in poetry, and so on. At the same time, science, we had gone to the moon. And with very little other than a pencil and a paper did we do that. And so we just saw a decline over our experience at the school over the past 40 years.
I wanted to.
At this school.
Yeah.
No, not
at Pima.
Pima College.
Pima College is where they're from, guys.
I think in general schools around the nation.
We were from there. We were real close to the University of Arizona. We at the same time saw the humanities program eliminated at the University of Arizona and Arizona State.
It's not just talk, guys. It's real.
Yeah.
They're eliminating departments.
Northern Arizona kept it, but we were sitting there. We had talked about this. Tony and I would sit and have coffee and go on and on, like old people like us do. We'd go on and on about the problems. Well, one day it occurs to you, why are you whining about the problems? Why don't you see what you can do to fix the problem? Talking's cheap. What are you going to do to try to fix it? And we decided this is where the idea for Shapeshifters came up. We weren't looking for anything other than to try to get an idea across that there needs to be these things are not separate. We don't live in little isolated boxes that have no connection. We're human beings, and we actually are holistic in our human beings. We are not separate boxes. And we both believed education was going toward boxes and wondering why students aren't interested. And I want to say something today. We were in Jeff's class and watching Jeff teach. He's pretty holistic in how he teaches that. That was a very, very active group in there.
Shout out Jeff Manzi.
Very excellent job, Jeff. Really,
I appreciate that. Thanks.
In fact, we became envious that we now, at least I know, I miss now teaching, because that's the enthusiasm to see your students in the way you brought things together in terms of the integration of story, folklore, legend, and so on that derives directly in phenomenalism and into the ideas of prefiguration and so on and so forth. These are excellent ways to get the student to think and so on, and to actually critically think. And one thing I can piggyback on what Stu said is that the idea that really got to me in that one day was when we pulled up the Department of Education stats on figures of $1 to 7 cents. This is terribly wrong. And to see the decline in humanities means there's a whole chunk that's outside the realm of a student's experience. And you used to call it putting Swiss cheese in the brain, because you it's easy to put the hole in.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, I know. It's difficult to fill the hole. And I think humanities and art augmented science in a way that science can never do.
And historically, the greatest scientists were obsessed with arts. Galileo came from a family of musicians. I mean, I can go down the line. Einstein spent most of any spare time playing a violin. Yeah. There was a whole, these are just, every one of them, they never thought of these things as separate.
Perming his hair?
Wow. Pretty much.
I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, when you're looking at most of the scientists, they were very well versed in languages. They had to be. There was an academic language, Latin, and then there was the vernacular language, their language. It could have been Italian or Dutch or whatever. But the point was, you had this distinction. They had to know these languages, and how many scientists really did have a background? If you even take Oppenheimer, who had a tremendous background in Sanskrit,
it's not an accident.
And philosophy,
Bhagavad Gita,
and philosophy, and philosophy, because the old joke is, of course, an old scientist doesn't, as I am probably, become rather poor philosophers. I'd rather have that than non-philosopher at all. Yeah. Personally, I'd rather be a poor philosopher. But
I'm a poor philosopher.
And when you look at most of a lot of the books coming out today, that when the scientists and mathematicians are writing these textbooks or books for the lay public, they are really emphasizing the idea that they hold philosophical perspectives, and they bring in a lot of history to that, and they bring a lot of philosophy into it, which means they themselves are versed in it, but they're older, and they got that experience somewhere, and they got it from school. They got it from the professors. And that's what we see lacking in this context.
Yeah, and I'll also add to that. I am completely endorsing this whole thing. Obviously, I'm bringing you guys here, but also, something else that is striking to me is the sort of artistic vision necessary for a scientific approach to things. These scientists had creative vision, the sort of thing that requires imagination and thinking outside the box. Stuff that we typically attributes you typically associate with the humanities, fine arts, performing arts. I think the very best scientists are very artistic, and I think the best artists sort of have a grasp of the more scientific, precise craft version dimensions of things. But at the same time, that's also just one, I would say, just one among many levels
Can I
of the overlap.
ask?
I'm sorry, yeah, what's up?
So I missed the meeting yesterday too. Can I ask what was talked about during the meeting? Like the subject of the meeting was?
Yeah,
What,
sure.
what we did is talk about some of what you've heard now. And we talked about the problem, and then we talked about how we integrated into it a step program, and how that you want not to sit there and have every faculty member add just in every science add it, or be blunt. A lot of humanities people are afraid of the science, so let's go the other way. They don't want to talk about that. It needs to be a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to let them call me out like that, guys?
So what we wanted to do, and we brought up the idea that these two go hand in hand. Now, I didn't bring it up at the meeting yesterday, but I would like to say it now, that what people forget is science is an art.
Yeah.
Like all arts, it has a medium. And what we've seen is a lot of people master the medium, but never the art. In order to be a true artist, obviously I got to know the craft, or I can't do it. But a craftsman is not necessarily an artist.
Yeah.
And what we've seen in the sciences is a lot of craftsmen, brilliant craftsmen, but no artists.
Yeah, Kuhn had said it in a very interesting way in the 60s when he wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolution, when he said that scientists know the process like a puzzle, and they piece it together like a puzzle. And I think what he meant by that, and he's a complex, usually there's a simple version of Kuhn and there's a difficult one. I think always the difficult one is the one that gets missed. And when you talk about a puzzle, that's one thing. But when you try to piece together the existence of certain particles in our universe that we've never seen, when we talk about creation of the universe from its very beginnings, these are artistic and philosophical questions, and they're answered at times rather simply and rather rapidly. And being in philosophy and being in humanities, you know that several of these questions are not that trivial, and they're extremely complex. It's when we go to the simplistic solutions that cause difficulties, and several times the solution is simple, but it takes a long time to get through that complexity to get to the simplicity.
Humanitas.
Excellent, excellent.
Nice.
Yeah. So did you have something going?
Oh no, I was just looking at myself.
Oh, okay.
Can I, let me just say one more thing, if you don't mind. Actually, Stewart brought a good point, and that was when we started Shapeshifters, it's easy to complain. And it's easy to see the brokenness in the system and wanting to do something about it, but it's hard to know what to do. So that's why we came up with a 6-step process to we based it basically on our memorable teachers, I think, right? The ones that made an impact on us that we carry through in our academic career, the ones we focused on. And our at least my teaching, came from a collective of all the teachers that I considered the important ones, and I remembered that were usually good. They could have been bad, and I tried to avoid what they did, but in this case, we put it together as a collective. And so we really wanted to put something constructive into place.
Yeah, and I think, and Tony hit on something there. One of the things, if you look at your education, wherever you're at now, you remember certain teachers.
Yeah.
Why do you remember them? I was we were with Jeff last night at dinner, and I was telling a story. I
wasn't invited, man. What?
I don't know. We didn't see you. We would have invited if
He was
saw you.
specifically not invited.
We could have easily substituted you for Stewart Barr. That would have been very, very nice. That would have been the way to do it. Yeah.
You still can.
I still can. When I went through school, I like languages, so I had 5 languages. Well, when I went to take classical Greek, the guy who taught it was an archaeologist. And we get into class the first day, and he looks at us and he says, "Number 1, you're undergraduates. I don't like undergraduates. I don't want to grade you because you have nothing to say." So I'm thinking, oh, okay, whatever. He says, "So there'll be no grades in here. I don't test you because you're boring. There's nothing to test you for." So that's fine. He says, "We do translations every day." If you 3 times you miss the translation, means you don't do them. You could miss all day long and screw it up, but if you don't do it 3 times, you're out. So I give A's or F's. I don't do any in between grades. So to me,
I love that.
that's
Stakes are high.
yeah. Well, for me, I thought that's great. That means I can do F work as long as I try to do F work. I still get an A. Where's the downside here? I was always looking for some scam like that. So anyway, one day,
That's why I've always said that Stewart Barr is 2 clicks from 25 to life. So it's amazing that he's here today.
so one day we're doing these sets of translations, and I kept missing a declension, and it was the 3rd or 4th time I missed it. So he sits there and he looks at me and he says, "What are you, slow? How many times do I got to tell you? You keep missing that." And I looked at him and said, "Of course I'm slow, or we wouldn't be having this problem, would we? Can we move on?"
Triggered.
But later on, he left the University of Arizona, and we had him at Pima. He was a great art historian, and his research in archaeology was Roman slaves. He said, everybody looks at the upper classes. How did the slaves live? He wrote lots of stuff on it.
Oh, interesting.
Brilliant man.
Yeah, one of the aspects of that we're seeing in universities currently is the switching away from the lecture when you have a lot of technology taking place of things. Not that we've been anti-technology, although we've been accused of that over and over again. In fact, we've been almost chased off a campus one time. You remember those days,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I don't wanna
And because we would either I shouldn't say this on the radio, but we would try to let's just say we would be in interference to the technology, as I remember. Only because we wanted the lecture is what we remembered, and the lecture brings out the 6 items that we were talking about yesterday in terms of the processes.
jump
Was one of them animate?
and so
What's
we
that?
really
Animate was one
Yeah,
of them.
animate.
animate,
Rejuvenate.
originate, rejuvenate. You remember the others?
Yeah, something. Those one that sounded
Tell
like
the
French.
story.
Tell the story.
Dos ex machina.
Yeah, that's it.
Rejuvenate.
Rejuvenate.
Rejuvenate,
And
yeah.
so every professor we had those characteristics where they would either originate the story, where does it motivate, how does it motivate? No one really cares about the Pythagorean theorem. I mean, you could do without it, I'm sure. If I ask you, do you like mathematics, you're going to say no, of course, and that's the common answer in this context. But if you understood a little more about the origins of why that was significant, not just historically, right?
Yeah.
but within the pre-Socratic philosophical foundations upon which Pythagoras was a part of, a significant part of, you bring life to it. You bring it back to life in an animated way, and then originating.
When you do it, and like I said, you bring that up. You bring it. What, and I, as a teacher, instruction to me, we used to kind of make fun of it. You want to be able to bring it to life. I would go into class and I would tell everybody, you're never going to hear from me. When we do a certain author, you're hearing from them.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. I have never done anything that you're ever going to hear from me in 200 years. So when you're going to do anything, you're going to hear it from me. So if you tell me yesterday I said this, I'm going to say, no, I said nothing. So-and-so said this. And part of it was acting. It's part of an acting, an animation that these teachers, and you rejuvenate a whole process by bringing it back to life. These steps all work together. They're not separate.
How is it different from edutainment, or is it the same?
Edutainment can be, and I'm not going to critique it per se, can be instructive. There's nothing wrong, I think, at a certain, but edutainment has to you have to have the education equaling or greater than the entertainment.
I think that's exactly right.
I think if you go right back to the initial words, to instruct is to insert, to educate is to withdraw. And I think when you see a profile in front of you, a lecturer, a professor, and that's why you call a professor, you profess to know, but it's more than just knowing. It's not content. It's a lot more than that. So we are going to try to withdraw from the student that's already not necessarily there, but a talent that they intrinsically see in themselves. I can insert anything into anyone. If I want to learn how to tear down a transmission, I don't want education, I want insertion. I want to know exactly the bolts and so on that I have to pull apart. But once I get into that, I want education to know how do I solve the problem of this particular transmission. And it extends across all barriers.
And I think one of the things when we talk about technology, myself, we use it. The problem we saw rapidly happening is technology is a tool of education. Education's not a tool of technology. And once we started to reverse that, where education became the tool of technology, you're not doing anything anymore. A lecture should use all the technology that's available to make it work. But it doesn't mean I get rid of it for the basically the, as you said, entertainment. A lot of education, or a lot of that is entertainment.
Yeah.
There was a time when, as a student, I remember when we would talk to other students through different universities. We go to conferences and so on. As an undergraduate or graduate student, and we would sit down and chat, and they'd be at one college or university, and we wouldn't say something like, at least in physics, my background, we wouldn't say things like, what course did you take? It was, what textbook did you study from? And there were certain textbooks, so we knew the names of the authors, and that determined what they were actually dealing with. And there were only 4 or 5 authors that were actually, through the universities. And these authors were amazing in how we read them. So it became, and then when they said their author, and I was taught by, and it turned out that author was the teacher of our teachers. So you had a progression of history.
Yeah.
What I was going to ask is, was part of the discussion yesterday kind of how academic fields or academic systems prioritize sciences over artistic things, or prioritize more seemingly practical things over things that seem like abstract, like science, or like humanities or philosophy or arts or things like that?
What I would say to you is, it's a compound answer. It's a complicated. I would say yes, they do. But now the question becomes why. Yeah. I'm not so sure they do it for the intrinsic value of the science. They do it because it's easier to measure. It's much harder to measure a philosophical essay.
Yeah.
Whether you can do a certain mechanical thing, you can then have a measurement of success and failure. So I start concentrating on areas that are easy to measure. So the education becomes, what's the easiest to measure, what gets the most dollars? How do I measure the artistic intent? How do I measure an aesthetic evaluation? In the same way, I would ask you for Newtonian descriptions of gravity.
That's right.
It's an entirely different piece.
Can you relate that to? Because I remember you said something yesterday about science has some truths in it, though little truth.
What I was saying yesterday was that science is kind of like a know-it-all that's only sometimes right.
Okay.
And
a real Uche.
My name's Alicia.
That's right.
And we never want to be around a know-it-all that's sometimes right, because that is really dangerous. You never know when they are right, and that's the problem. It's only sometimes right. We, as scientists, generate far more questions than we answer. And every time we answer it, it becomes something to be challenged. And at times it isn't challenged because the collective is so big that it becomes common agreement, and that becomes the truth. And that business of having truth not being absolute is what science should be about, until you finally get to a truth that you hold to is the more truthful than it was before. If it sounds convoluted, it's because I've been teaching Stewart Barr for too long.
One of the things too, I think, as in the humanities, coming out of that, I've always thought, to me, and I had a background in astronomy, science is one of the most beautiful arts around. What I've been saying, I don't want anybody to take that. It raises some of the most unbelievable questions. You see some of the most unbelievable stuff around, and particularly in astronomy. My wife is a wildlife biologist. You see stuff in there that, if it doesn't inspire your imagination, personally, I think you're dead in the head.
Phones are lighting up.
But there's a case where that's what science should do. One of the things, it's unbelievable when you get involved in that. When someone gets involved, I'm not a mathematician, but enough I've seen some of the stuff like Hilbert and and I see how they got excited about it. I don't understand it as well as Tony might, but I do know that I understand the beauty of what they're looking for. And there's an aesthetics to mathematics and science that is often overlooked.
That's right. One of the things you might want to look at when we were waiting for Jeff yesterday to show us the campus, Stu and I sat down at the...
Uncharacteristic of me.
Well, we thought you were trying to avoid us because you figured you made a big mistake getting here. So we thought maybe this was our signal. We should anyway.
Maybe we should get the bus home. You cashed the check so quickly. I had to.
Anyway, so we were sitting in Starbucks in the science building. I think it's the science building, and I looked over to Stu, and there was a rather nice sculpting outside. I said, "Stu, you know what that is?" And he looked, and much to my disappointment, he says, "Nah, what do I know?" And it was the carbon atom. And in the definite forms of the carbon atom, here is art put in front of your science building, and we've never seen a carbon atom. We've seen representations of it. We've seen technically what we think it looks like, and so on. And I can give you all the fanciness of a wave function, blah blah blah, kind of stuff, being technical. But to see it in the form of an artistic object,
A sculpture.
Beautiful. And then turning around, just turning my neck around, I saw 6 mathematical shapes.
Yeah.
And by that time, Professor Manzi came in, sat down, and I looked at Stu again, and I said, "What are those up there, Stu?" And he looked dull again. And he said, "You know what that is?" No, I know. And that was it. No, but he did know.
Right after that, I asked him what the 7 deadly sins are.
I got one of them only. I think it was that deadly sin? Never have coffee with Stew Barr.
Yeah, that's
anyway. It was a parabola and a linear line and a logarithmic curve and a parabola and so on, and a cubic and so on. And these were just put up there artistically as mathematical pictures, no reference to what they were, just the pictures themselves, which was rather amazing. I said, this is the conjoining of art and humanities at the basic level. Whoever designed the building, whoever put the interior design in. Great idea, knew this. And if you go to science museums and you go to science university, science buildings, universities, you often see this in older ones in this country. And because there was this integration, everybody knew what these things were. They didn't have to put a sign to it. And to see the symmetry of a carbon atom as a piece of sculpture was remarkable, and we made those notes.
Yeah, somebody out of the humanities would have known that. I had some of the science because when I went through philosophy, at the University of Arizona at the time, the emphasis was on analytical philosophy and science and mathematical philosophy. So we were required, as a minimum math requirement, to have second semester calculus. And you were required to have 12 units of logic, including 9 units of formal logic. You got used to doing that, and I look back at it now. At the time, I thought, what do I need this for? This is insane. When I look back now, what I got out of it is I saw the art and beauty in all of those things that I originally didn't have the foggiest idea about. So, and a lot of times, and this really struck me, I couldn't explain what I was seeing I could explain the logic. I couldn't explain the aesthetics. It struck me somewhere that I could not really explain, but gave me a feeling inside that I also couldn't explain. Almost a mystery. It came to me almost as a mystery looking at this, and I saw the aesthetics of that.
One other thing that we try to do also is to bring as much art into it through various forms, not just artistic, saying this is artistic. You're all familiar with the atom, and you're all familiar with these phrases that we all hold to chemistry and biology and physics and so on. Mm-hmm. But when you go right down to it, the remarkable idea of an atom itself is artistic in many ways. The first way is Democritus coming up with an idea that how could you look at all the variations in the universe and see it coming from one elemental particle, indivisible, and then later on losing that idea through history and then resurrected again by Lucretius in a poem called The Nature of Things. And I remember several years ago, Stu and I would go to conferences up in Portland, right? Yeah. And Stu picked up a book, and it was called The Swerve, I believe.
You got to read it.
Yeah, you got to read this. And it's a dissertation on our modern world is based on the resurrection of Democritus' idea.
Through Lucretius.
Through Lucretius.
It gives a whole history
how
Lucretius's ideas got lost, and groups of monks took them from Italy to Germany. Mm-hmm. And those ideas, when they resurrected them, led to a lot of it to the scientific revolution. And from a poem by Lucretius. It's an amazing thing.
We hope to be giving a talk in March, I think. Is that right? In Philadelphia, at
Seamless
the,
plug.
Yeah,
was
sorry.
beautiful.
Yeah, I know.
No, that's great.
I know. Plug.
He's from New York. They do that all the time.
Can't help it. And the title of the talk, we always meet in the morning, Stu and I, whenever we can, just to talk and chat things over a lot about shapeshifters and about what we've been doing and so on and so forth. And came up with doing some research that Dante Alighieri had gotten much of his ideas of the Paradiso and the Inferno and the Purgatorio by looking at the dome near Duomo in Florence, the St. John's Baptist.
So fascinating.
And and then 400 years later, Einstein sees the same dome and comes up with a curved universe idea. And so we got this idea that we should probably put Dante and Einstein together at a cafe somewhere, and so we called it Cafe Paradiso, and that's the title. That's the title of the talk. Dante and Einstein meet at Cafe Paradiso.
I love it.
And the last line that the Stewarts came up with this one was, "Be there, your."
Humanity
depends. Humanity depends on it.
Guys, let me ask you one question, because we have to wrap up shortly, very shortly. And I'll do a quick plug, too. I'm leading a phenomenology workshop at 2 o'clock today, upstairs in the Learning Center, Medina 260, 15 minutes from now. It's already maxed out, but if you show up on standby and there's a no-show, you could take that spot. So feel free to do that. And if, shout out Melinda Franklin. If she's not looking, maybe I'll sneak you in anyway. Over the cap, but I want to ask you guys this: you do such a beautiful job of showing how, in ways that are coming from you guys, it seems almost painfully obvious that these two things are mutually reinforcing, humanities and the sciences, respectively. I wonder though, why is it that people see them as incommensurate? And and I'm reminded by this poem by Wordsworth: "We murder to dissect." So at a certain point, it seems like we dissected a holistic education for the sake of, I suppose, specializations. And, there are certainly justified practical reasons for that. And I think you have to take those seriously, of course. But what you guys are getting at is a deeper notion of, actual intrinsic value of one versus the other. And to what extent have people succumbed to this kind of acceptance of one being somewhat superior over the other, or just more of a challenge even than the other?
Go
ahead, Steve.
I'll just go.
We'll be back after this.
I'll just kind of repeat, Jeff. I think that's a great question in there. And how did we end up here? My idea of how we ended up here is, as we move toward education, all of it, for obviously good reasons. People go to school, they want to know they're going to get something. They often accumulate thousands of dollars in student loans. You don't want to think you're coming out and not having.
That's just me.
Yeah. So, my wife has $49,000 in student loan debt.
Yeah.
So, you come out of this, you want something. But what got lost in that is, granted, that's an idea, you want something. But there's also the human. And the human has gotten lost when we began to divide these. In other words, the idea became, if you take this course, what good is it? I used to have students say to me, why do I take this course? I don't need it. And I'd say, you take it because I need a job. Okay, can we move on? But there was
too real for what I'm saying.
But what I wanted to emphasize to them is, there's more to life than just working. There's a whole part of your life that's part of you as a human being. Why do you seek religion? You're not going to get any pay for that. You do all kinds of things already in your life outside of any material or financial interest. You have to balance the idea of getting something on one hand, it's material, but the human on the other. And what happened, in my view, is that getting something took precedence over everything else. Two reasons: it paid, and it's easy to measure.
Mm-hmm. And also, science became very complex. You had the Human Genome Project, and you had which was supposed to bring tremendous benefits of health and so on. It fell a little short of that, but the point is, it will eventually one day do this. And you go from one advance to another, and you get closer and closer to what was the feeling of absolute truth, which you had raised the question. Mm-hmm. And when you have that kind of seductive answer that this is the way it is, you move in that direction. Stewart made a very good analogy yesterday. To boil a frog, you can either do it by throwing in the hot water or slowly raising the temperature.
Yeah.
And I think what happened to humanity is they slowly raised the temperature. And at one point, we neglected it. And I know we didn't personally. It was always part of the front load of our lecture was that. And I know we should make the distinction that we're not talking about infusing or integrating it into a course. It's just that how we naturally would do this. To bring life to the course in the context of bringing life to a topic to motivate the major idea. We think a lot of that's missing. And so science is easy to measure, as Stewart said. It's commensurate. Humanities is difficult, and who pays for it? The payment, technically, is the benefit that the scientist achieves by communication, by writing, communicating their ideas, generating more creative ideas that might give even more further solutions. And they go hand in hand. When you go one over the other, that's when you have difficulties. And I think that's what it's binary in that context, and we think that's not the right way.
Very well put, guys. Thank you so much. That was a great response. Guys, I'm afraid we're going to have to start wrapping up. Is there anything that any of the students here want to say?
Never seen Manji so prompt to end the meeting.
Yeah.
Well, that's completely from Sue and I. That's completely understandable.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It happens all the time.
Let the students
when we
know.
go somewhere,
10 minutes early.
that shameless plug really wasn't for Philadelphia. I think it was for here, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was gonna ask a question real quick.
We're just about out of time. So thanks, guys, for coming. Oh, I'm sorry. What's that, Raphael?
Okay, so science, like great philosophers and great scientists, they have, if you look at their history, and they have similar things in common, like religion, or this mathematician was also a philosopher, or this philosopher also knew mathematics and music and all that. So, looking at our world today, what can you say was the reason for why these people had that in common? Why was that?
Well, I think some of it, if I were to look at some of the people you were mentioning, a lot of lower division education until basically after World War II in this country and Europe was heavily emphasized on the arts, so that if you were going to go what we would call the arts, and here I'm including the sciences, but it was a holistic, you got a basic degree. Then when you specialize in your advanced degrees. So I think when they went into the advanced degrees, when they came out of it, they had that background already as their undergraduate education.
Totally, yeah.
That's right. The whole idea that you have a compartmentalization occurring early on, right after World War II, at least in our country, you have this notion of this or that. And it was before that an humanity. The Stewart started in a discussion, humanities, science, and humanities in this context. And one other example of this where so critical was Kepler was so entrenched in the Platonic solids that his entire theory of how the planets operated was based on a philosophical concept from Plato. And when he had to even go against that by going from circular patterns to elliptical patterns, and which worked much better, he resisted it internally. That's how significant the philosophical foundation was. I can just make one recommendation. Stewart recommended to me to read some years ago a great book called The Cave and the Light. And it brings the distinction between the conflict between Plato and Aristotle that really does generate the picture. If you think Aristotle as science that we know it and Plato as philosophy as we know it, there's a huge conflict there, but this book did a remarkable job in telling us how we got to where we are today because of this conflict. And without Plato and Aristotle, I don't think we'd be here.
Well, we wouldn't be yapping. They'd probably be happy.
They'd be happy as anything, wouldn't they? Yeah.
Everybody into the phone booth time machine. Thank you. See, the students don't get those references anymore. Anyways, okay,
It's
so
a TARDIS. It's a TARDIS, isn't it?
yeah. I need to.
Doctor Who, yeah.
Oh, see, now they know. Now they know it's a TARDIS.
Also, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yeah, they don't know that too.
I know
Yeah.
that one.
I'm surprised you know that one. You know, Stu and I were actually the original actors in that. Did you know that?
No, we were in Dumb and Dumber.
Dumb and Dumber.
That's hilarious. That's so funny. Okay, guys, we got to wrap up here real quick. Also, let me just do a few plugs. Once again, the Philosophy Club Radio Hour, which is what you've been listening to, is an extension of the Philosophy Club proper. Philosophy Club proper meets every Tuesday from 2 to 3 in EO 32. That's El Paso Hallway 32. And, of course, every Wednesday from 1 to 2 is this radio program. Now, also, a week from today, so Halloween will be the second installment in the Philosophy and Film series. So the first installment was a collaboration with the International Film Series here on campus, and it was Wild Strawberries, Ingmar Bergman, a very artistic cinematic masterpiece. This next one is called Memento. Came out in like 2002.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a different kind of movie, but I would say plenty of philosophical depth to it there. Especially we've had topics in the past dealing with personal identity formation and loss of innocence from earlier in my class, as well as things like time and what is human time. Yeah, so we'll be doing that from 3:30 to 5:30 in the old planetarium, which is Wichita Hall 116. And there'll be popcorn and pizza and all sorts of good stuff. I love watching films, by the way, in that. That's my new film venue. It's the greatest. It's killer. We're going to do that. So I want to shout out that as well. And again, thank my guests for being here. Thanks for flying in. Oh, yeah, when's the date? Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. The Philosophy Club secretary here is advising me of another plug to make is the fundraiser. We are going to raise funds for the Philosophy Club, and I will say this: Philosophy Club accepts donations year-round. We're allowed to do that, so you don't have to wait for the fundraiser. But if you'd like to get a little something as well, the morning after Thanksgiving break, as you guys know, we have an extended Thanksgiving break. The morning after, from 7 a.m. to noon, we will be selling hot coffee, hot tea, orange juice, kolaches, donuts, to really get your morning started in prices that are cheaper than what you might find elsewhere around campus. So we may even been selling T-shirts. I think we're going to sell T-shirts. I think that's going to happen too. We got the new designs going. I vetted them with all of my faculty here, and everybody loved them. So it's happening. That'll be exciting as well. So yeah, guys, look out for those, and that's all the plugs for now, I suppose. You are listening to KDUX Web Radio, broadcast live from Richland College in Dallas, Texas. We're the voice of Richland College. Views expressed on this show are my own, unless otherwise stated, and do not reflect the opinion of KDUX Web Radio, Richland College, the Shape Shifties, or the DCCCD.
Or Alicia Keys.
Or Alicia Keys. All right, guys. So here, one last thing before we leave. I have a tagline. I have a sign-off that I like to say before every episode ends. It's think about it, but you got to say it real cocky. So at the count of 3, well, I'll say think about it. You ready?
Yeah.
You just broke my brain. The first one, whatever I said is what we're gonna do. Okay, yeah, after 3. So after 3, we all say, let's think about it. 1, a 2,